American viewers, bear with us. We're not used to this. Pogroms, vigilante groups stopping cars, allowing cars driven by white people to proceed, cars driven by black or brown people. No one knows what will happen to them. Mobs of people assaulting anyone of colour that they can find. Attempted lynchings, people being dragged from their cars and ruthlessly beaten. People being stabbed, mosques being besieged, having to be defended by non-Muslim well-wishers and the Muslim congregations within. The police are often nowhere to be found. I don't say that as an attack on them, not entirely in any case. I have vivid memories and can still feel the batons of the miners' strike of 1984-85 when to crush 250,000 of Britain's coal mining community, the entire resources of the state were mobilised and the miners were beaten, bludgeoned into submission. There was no shortage of police then. Every time we showed up at a picket line, we were virtually outnumbered by the massed ranks of Britain's finest in the constabulary. How different the Britain we live in today. People are dragged out of their cars by mobs of youths draped in the St. George's Cross, who's Turkish, by the way, some say even Palestinian, dragged out of their cars and set upon. People have been stabbed. There are stories of people having acid thrown at them. You don't have to look in the crystal ball. You can listen to the videos. The videos taken by the thugs themselves as they say things, women by the way, say things like, let them all burn, what the F do I care, as men burst in through the doors and the windows and set fire to a hotel full of hundreds of people, some of whom believed, that's all I can say, believed to be refugees. There are 0.18% of the people in Britain are refugees. It is a problem, and I myself have adumbrated that problem on here many times at some personal and political cost. We in the Workers' Party disagree with mass immigration. We believe that it beggars the country from which they've come and depresses living standards in the countries that they arrive. We want all refugees to be able to go back to their homes, which is why we say we should stop making war, invasion, exploitation and occupation are the handmaidens of the great refugee flows that have occurred across Africa and Asia and the Middle East over this last 25 years or so. But there are some things that are non-negotiable. And the most important of those non-negotiable terms is this. We will not tolerate pogroms in England or in Wales or in Northern Ireland. There haven't yet been any attempts in Scotland, but no one should rest on their laurels about that. We will not allow anyone in this island to be treated as a subhuman, because especially people of my age who grew up in the shadow of the Second World War, we know where the subhumanization of people ends up. It ends up in the gas chambers at Birkenau, at Auschwitz. We know that genocide is the end of the road for subhumanization of other people. What's non-negotiable is that the legal rights, civil rights, human rights of every single person in this island are exactly the same. However they came here, whenever they came here, whatever colour they are, and however they pray or don't. That's not negotiable. And so the state has a responsibility, an equal responsibility, to defend the lives, to defend the property, to defend the livelihood, to defend the human right to worship. Every person in this island has exactly the same rights. And the state, which I was brought up to believe was in the final analysis an armed body of men, well, where are the armed bodies of men, is what I am asking. It's true that successive governments dramatically reduced the number of police officers that we have in this country. It's also true that they're not as tall or as fit as the police officers we used to face during the miners' strike in 1984-85. Some of them look like diddy men that would not be able to confront an angry, tight-fisted fascist in the streets of Rotherham, Middlesbrough, or wherever else is kicking off right now. But that's not their fault. It's successive governments that have closed almost all police stations. Our police stations now look like Greg's, the baker, and several of them are now on fire or have been burnt out. The police were not even able to defend their own police stations. The police are doing their level best. I have every reason to believe that. The fire brigade, which is now involved in fighting fires caused by these racist, fascist mongers that are roaming the whole country, it seems, but particularly in the north of England. The police are doing their best to protect people. They're doing their best to suppress these rioters, but there's just not enough of them. Neither has the Prime Minister or the government shown any leadership at all. I begged the question a couple of days ago, will Keir Starmer outlast Liz Truss as Britain's Prime Minister, or even a lettuce in the life cycle of a lettuce? And for, 48 hours, I began to doubt that he would. He has now surfaced and he has now spoken. But it was too little and too late, and it did not address the underlying and fundamental problem which exists here. The reason that the abandoned cities and towns of the north and the entirely bereft coastal communities with nothing left, no tourists, no business, no industry, no employment, no hope, filled, their adrenaline running, fueled entirely on anger and alienation. The blame for that lies with our political class. It's a uniparty, it's a duopoly, it's two sides of the same backside, so I'm not making a particularly anti-Labour or a particularly anti-conservative point here. For 40 years, Britain has been governed by the blancmange of centrism. Neither one thing nor the other, neither conservative nor socialist. It has governed a Britain which has begun in front of our eyes to wither away. Trust in our institutions has withered away. If it's on the BBC, people don't believe it. If a policeman tells you what to do, you simply don't do it, and you might, if you have a brick handy, hit him over the head with it. Our courts, our parliament, above all, our whole system is broken. Britain is broken. And that's under the apparently never-ending rule of centrism. And that has left a lot of dry and despairing human tinder all over the north of this country. It's not so much that they are poor. They certainly don't need to break into Phones R Us in order to liberate the phones as they've been doing. They don't have to break into shoe shops to be properly shod. They don't have to break into the clothes shops that they are now busily looting. I'm not suggesting that kind of poverty. I'm talking about the poverty of hopelessness, the poverty of alienation. And just like, and this for American viewers, please don't be offended, just like the poor whites down in Alabama, the poor whites down in Mississippi, for these people, the only thing The only spiritual, moral thing that they have in their lives is that they're not black, that they're not brown, that they're not Asian. They can look down on somebody in the way that the British state and its liberal, progressive bubble looks down on them. They've got somebody else that they can look down upon, even though those communities very often have far more in terms of material, spiritual, familial, community, health and happiness than they do. They still imagine that white is right, that white is might, that the people that look like them are somehow the master race. I'm afraid that's what's happening here in Britain. These hopeless, alienated thugs are roaming around looking for people who don't look like them to set upon. And it's only a matter of time before this becomes a real pogrom. I said this 72 hours ago. People said I was exaggerating. But it's only for the grace of God that someone has not yet been literally hanged. Someone has not yet been literally burned to death in these riots that are happening now. Of course, riots go up like a rocket, they come down like a burned stick, and so will this one. And Starmer meant it. I'm sure he is a former chief prosecutor after all, when he said that they will regret having taken part in this disorder. They will be sent to prison for many, many years. That is to say, if they're treated in the same way that the mainly black people who rioted in Britain in 2011 were treated, or the mainly Asian people who rioted in Bradford several years before that. If they're treated like they were treated, of course we must expect that, mustn't we? Then they will be in prison for many, many, many years. Their leader is sunning himself, sniffing cocaine in a Cyprus hotel right now. Yes, I refer to Stephen Laxley Yennon, or whatever his name is. Tommy Robinson, he'll be better known to you. He's literally in a Cypriot hotel by a swimming pool, sniffing coke at your expense. You idiot, far-right thugs who keep him in the style to which he has become accustomed. He lit the torch and ran away, fled out of London, and is now, he hopes, out of reach in Cyprus. I have a feeling that he'll be back to face the music pretty damned quick. But these people will go to prison for many years. They will never work. It'll be on their records, their personal records, for the rest of their lives, that they set upon a person just because he was black, that they let a car go through just because the driver was white, and they molested, if not abducted, the driver who was black or who was brown. Now, the failure of the police to control this situation, the absence of the British Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, where's she? We understand that the Prime Minister is on a much-needed holiday, and that in any case, he knocks off work on a Friday at 6 o'clock to observe the Sabbath, the Jewish Sabbath. We understand that. But it's now Sunday night, and there's no sign of any government rallying of the forces of the state to confront what's happening in Britain today at all. Where's the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner? She doesn't knock off on a Friday at 6 o'clock. Far as we know, she's not on holiday, but we haven't seen or heard anything from her. So in the absence of the state and an armed body of men to protect the communities and the individuals that are now at mortal risk, the people are beginning to organize themselves. Now, I have never called for that. I did not want that to happen because I know where it can lead. But if you were a Muslim in Blackburn, if you were a Muslim in Bolton, where there are tens, scores of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands across both towns and cities, would you sit in your mosque waiting for a non-existent police presence to defend you? Would you stay in your home when a firebomb might come through the window at any minute? Or would you organize yourselves and your brothers to defend your community, to defend your families? Well, I'm afraid it's kind of obvious. It's not rocket science. That is what is now happening. And so Britain, this green and pleasant land, is facing the possibility of large rival groups of attackers and defenders running into each other and pouring more petrol onto the flames. As I say, you can't blame those communities for defending themselves when it appeared that Britain was no longer able, or perhaps was no longer prepared to defend themselves. So much for Britain. A much, much bigger fire is coming tonight. It surely will be tonight. It's a surprise it wasn't last night. It's a surprise it wasn't the night before, because the delay has allowed the United States, the United Kingdom, Jordan, Egypt, the UAE, and all the other allies of Israel to rally to its defense. So it cannot be much longer delayed. We're promised from both Tehran and from the Lebanese resistance movement a retaliation of an entirely new kind. I have some ideas about what that might look like. It might, for example, look like the liberation of the illegally occupied Golan Heights, stolen from Syria in 1967 and occupied by Israel, annexed by Israel ever since. An annexation, an occupation, recognized by absolutely nobody in the world, except Donald Trump, who has a block of flats there called Trump Heights, named in his honor. It might look like a ground invasion of the Galilee. It might look like the actual liberation of parts of occupied Palestine for the first time since 1948 and the original Nakba catastrophe, which sent 800,000 Palestinians spinning into orbit right across the world and settling as refugees, lucky ones in the west and the north, unlucky ones in the refugee camps in the Arab countries nearby. It might look like a ballistic surprise for Israel that it has as its worst nightmare. You see, both Israel and Iran can now be said to be undeclared nuclear weapon powers. Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons. It has never acknowledged them. They have never been inspected. No one in the world, no government in the world even mentions it. We only know about it because the brave Jewish whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu told us about it in Andrew Neil's Sunday Times, and has spent the last quarter of a century and more in solitary confinement and imprisonment of various kinds. He's allowed out now, but he's not allowed to go anywhere, and he's not allowed to speak to anybody. But now we know, I personally thought I knew for the last few weeks, Iran has nuclear weapons too. And from their point of view, why shouldn't they? Everyone targeting them is a nuclear weapons power. Britain is a nuclear weapons power. France is a nuclear weapons power. The US is a nuclear weapons power. And Israel is a nuclear weapons power. So now there is nuclear parity between Iran and Israel. I don't think the Iranians are, in the first instance, going to target a nuclear weapon at Tel Aviv, but I'm certain that they're going to target a ballistic missile, the ferocity and velocity of which has never been seen in any Middle Eastern war. And I think it's going to land right down the middle chimney of the Israeli Knesset. I believe that the bunker that Netanyahu is presently, right now, sitting in will probably be the only safe place in the whole of the so-called state of Israel. Only place it'll be safe to be. Palestine, I just can't get out of my mind the video that I saw this evening of a woman screaming as her child roasted in a blazing tent outside a hospital. I can't get out of my mind the never-ending stream now of hundreds of thousands of maimed, mutilated, murdered children and women being dragged out of burning buildings, being recovered from under the rubble, being carried into hospitals no longer worthy of the name. So destroyed, so enfeebled have they become. 300 days of this, and nobody in the West in power gives a single damn about it. It's going to be a bumpy night tonight, and if there's breaking news, we'll certainly bring it to you. Remember, it's 2 hours later in Palestine than it is here in the UK. Stay tuned. I'll be right back with the one and only Bryce Green. It's the mother of all talk shows.